Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Brian Griffin, and I am an analytics consultant here at Dun Solutions Group. And I wanted to welcome everyone to the webinar using Amazon SageMaker in the cloud for machine learning. So I just want to list out really briefly what I'm going to go through in this webinar. First, I'm going to introduce Dun Solutions and our mission and core values. And then I'm going to give a quick background of SageMaker and all of its capabilities. And then I'm going to highlight two new features that have come out in SageMaker in the last year, which is SageMaker Studio and SageMaker AutoML. I will demo these features live for you guys in Amazon AWS, and then I'll highlight some additional features that I think you guys should know about if you want to dive deeper into Amazon SageMaker. All right, so what is Dun Solutions? Dun Solutions is a digital transformation consultancy company focused on bringing velocity to our clients. Velocity is made up of two main components, speed and direction. We bring speed through process automation and direction through analytics. After all, if you're going to go fast, you better be going fast in the correct direction. Dun Solutions has a long history of delivering innovative business technology solutions to companies. We are headquartered just outside of Chicago and have offices in Minneapolis and Bangalore, India. We believe every organization needs to have velocity, and velocity is what enables the velocity virtuous cycle. The velocity virtuous cycle is a feedback loop that uses the vast amount of data created through process automation to provide insight through analytics. These insights can then be fed back into the business process for improvement and optimization. Most people might view machine learning as solely an analytics project, but you'll see later how SageMaker helps automate your machine learning projects into production environment, supporting all three stages of the velocity virtuous cycle. Okay, so let's get into SageMaker. What is SageMaker? SageMaker is a fully managed machine learning service that allows you to complete the entire machine learning workflow in one place. Most of the development will take place in Jupyter notebooks, which I'm sure most data scientists are familiar with, and has support for multiple deep learning frameworks such as scikit-learn, PyTorch, TensorFlow, MXNet, and Apache Spark. On the right, you'll see a diagram of the SageMaker infrastructure, and you'll see that SageMaker is broken up into two main stages. The first is the training phase. This is where all your data pre-processing happens and where you actually fit the model. And then the second is the deployment phase. And this is where you deploy your models into production and host them on endpoints, so your application can interact with it. And what is cool about SageMaker is that with the use of these S3 buckets, the service is modular. So what this means is that you can train your model locally and use and pull those model artifacts into the S3 bucket so that you can use SageMaker services to deploy the model into production to use with your client application. Conversely, you can also use the first stage of SageMaker to train your model and then export your model externally to use on an external endpoint somewhere else. But even with all these capabilities that SageMaker provided, there are still some pain points in the typical data science project. So when you start a data science project, you mainly have one primary data set that you're looking at. But to properly explore and get the most value out of this data set, you must process it a bunch of different ways. This might mean imputation, this might be some standardization. It also can be some more complex algorithms like PCA. And with each different step you take, you are probably also going to explore a bunch of different algorithms that you want to use in combination with whatever pre-processing strategy you use. And with all these combinations of algorithms and pre-processing steps, you're going to get an exponential amount of models for one data set. And so if you're just one data scientist, this can be a lot to manage, and it'll be difficult to compare and evaluate which is your best models, especially when you have multiple criteria that you would like to look at. Maybe it's validation error, maybe it's runtime, or so on. And this is where SageMaker Studio can help. So what is SageMaker Studio? SageMaker Studio is an enhanced integrative development environment with more features geared to supporting the machine learning workflow for data scientists. It does all of the capabilities. It does what you can do prior with building and deploying a model into production, but also has new features to enhance both of these stages and also debug and track these models both in training phase and in the deployment phase. Experiments and trials are two key new features that help you manage and organize your different model training jobs, which helps solve the issue I was just talking about. And also it has integrated notebook sharing. So if you have a big data science team and you want to share it with them, share your work with them, it's become that much easier to share your work and collaborate. So I just wanted to highlight now the three big new features that are a part of SageMaker Studio. First, like I just briefly mentioned, SageMaker trials and experiments. So experiments is a way to organize between different data science projects that you are working on in Amazon SageMaker, and the trials are a good way to differentiate different model training jobs that you want to look at in a data science project. And so what's nice about these is that these experiments and trials are displayed in a very tabular format, so it's very easy to compare and evaluate between different trials in an experiment. And it's also very easy to collaborate and build on others' trials and experiments. There's also SageMaker Debugger, and this will mainly focus on the model training phase of your machine learning workflow. And so SageMaker Debugger is geared specifically towards the data science training issues. So this is not going to look at your typical software debuggers where it's runtime errors. This will look at more of your model training issues that aren't necessarily runtime errors, but they're good things to be alerted to when you're training a model. This can be something such as overfitting or overtraining. Another similar feature that's also integrated into SageMaker Studio, but focuses more on the deployment phase, is SageMaker Model Monitor. And this will mainly catch for what we call model drift. And so what model drift is when you deploy a model into production, sometimes that production data that is being fed into your deployed model might deviate a little bit from what the model was trained on originally. And if that deviates too far, then that's a big indicator that your model needs to be retrained so it can perform better in production. And so what Model Monitor will do was it'll automatically look for any model drift in any of your models that are deployed in production, and will alert the data scientists to it. The other big new feature is SageMaker Autopilot. And so SageMaker Autopilot automatically builds and explores different classification and regression models with different combinations of data preprocessors, algorithms, and hyperparameters. And so what I like about this is that most auto ML solutions that you see on the market today will just look at different algorithms and maybe try to tune for different with different hyperparameters. But what Autopilot does is it encompasses the entire machine learning workflow by incorporating the data preprocessors with the algorithms and the algorithm hyperparameters. After all, your models can only perform as well as the featureized data set that you give it. And so when it incorporates this extra step into its automated environment, it saves the data scientists a lot more time. And what's also nice about this feature is that it's not just going to give you what it thinks is the best model that it tried out. It will give you every single candidate solution that it evaluated with its best performing model. And so, like I mentioned previously, this feature might take 20 to 30 minutes to complete, but this will save weeks of development time for your typical data scientist. And I highly recommend using this feature, especially for the newer data scientists using Amazon SageMaker for the first time. So now I will show you a quick live demo of these features in action. So here I am in the SageMaker console. And so I just wanted to briefly show you what's changed. And so typically what we would go into SageMaker notebook instances and spin up a SageMaker Jupyter notebook to perform all our work in. But now what we can do is use this Amazon SageMaker Studio. Just click on this, and then you can open up your studio environment right here. And so I already have that pulled open in the second tab. And I wanted to show you, and this is Amazon SageMaker, and I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of what you see here. And so first in this left tab, left menu is your file explorer. This is all your data that is stored locally on the SageMaker instance. And then if you have a Git repository like I do here, this tab keeps track of all the changes, all the files you changed and added to your Git repository. And then this is shows your active kernels and terminal. Some tools that you can use in SageMaker Studio if you're using it for the first time. And this is your experiment pane. And so this is what I was talking about earlier, and I'll talk about in a little bit. I'll show in a little bit. Is this will list out all the experiments you currently have in your SageMaker session, along with some key metrics. Some other tools that you can use in SageMaker Studio, and then also a list of the endpoints you also have deployed. And so as I move to the right here, I have my SageMaker Jupyter notebook, which you all should be familiar with. And I just wanted to go through a quick demo to show you how everything runs together. And so first, in this first step, I of course need to install my the key packages into my environment, and that will be packages such as AWS CLI, Bodhi 3, and SageMaker Experiments. And then import all these libraries, Python and SageMaker libraries, into my notebook. And then I want to define the proper permissions and roles to access all the data from my S3 buckets. I'm actually here. I'm downloading the. I'm reading the data set, and then I will use that data set and upload it into an S3 bucket. And then here's where I define my algorithm that I'm going to use. So for this demo, I'm going to use the XGBoost pre-built algorithm. And then here I'm going to define my training and validation channels in my S3 bucket. And then here, if I just wanted to, here's where you would create your experiments programmatically. And then finally, we're going to get into the model training. And so I'm just quickly defining my my hyperparameters, and I'm defining what debug rules, what predefined debug rules I want to use when training this model. So for this, I'm looking at the training loss, and I'm also looking for any overtraining or overfitting in the model. And then I'll finally create the trial, and then define and train the model. And so this can take a minute or so, but I've already run it a few times. But you'll see if in this experiment that I've already created, you can right click and open the trial components list, and I'll give you a list of all the trials that are in this experiment. And so what you can see is that that new trial that I just run, you'll have an in progress. But for right now, I'm going to look at all the trials that I ran prior to this webinar. And I wanted to show you a cool, cool new feature. And so with all these trials that you run, not only can you look at specific specific metrics like your validation error or your training error, but you can also plot the validation, training error, and any hyperparameters that you might want to plot between trials. So I'll show that really quickly for you guys. So I'm just going to click this Add Chart button. And in this chart pane that you see here, let me just expand it a little bit. I'm just going to make a quick scatter plot looking at one specific hyperparameter. So here I'll just use the child weight of the XGBoost algorithm, and I'll see how the validation error deviates when I change the child weight. And so what you can see is this chart is actually also interactive, so I can zoom in and zoom out, really easily, and you can see how the validation error between the different trials that I already ran has changed. So maybe from this plot, I might want to, it might be beneficial for me to use a lower child weight of 1, but this also might need further trials to further evaluate the hyperparameters. And so also, as just as simple as it is to evaluate your different trials, you can also deploy models. So if I were to look at this, I can easily look at, let's just look at the validation error really quick. And you can sort really quickly by the validation error. And if I just wanted to use the lowest validation error and deploy that into production, I just hit this deploy model, and then you define the endpoint, what you want to call the endpoint, the capacity of the endpoint, and the number of instances you want in the endpoint, and then you can simply click deploy, and it's that easy to deploy a specific model into production. Also, one thing I wanted to highlight is also to check to make sure that all your trials passed your debugging rules that I specified earlier, that overfitting and the overtraining that I was talking about. You can look at this debugger status, or you can also open the trial details to look and go to the debugger tab and look at each explicit rule that you defined and make sure that none of the rules were violated. And you can look at that on this right pane over here. And one last thing, before I go back to the presentation, is that I want to show you the how easy it is to share a notebook. So if I can let me just, but you can use the Git repository to share. And then there's also a share button over here to copy and to share your link with other team members in your data science team. So let me go back to the presentation. And now I'm going to talk about some additional features that weren't in the demo, but I also think you guys should look at to dive deeper into SageMaker. So the first is pipe mode, and why I think pipe mode is so important is as we're advancing in the machine learning world, their streaming data sets are going to become more of a factor. And so what pipe mode does, it helps you solve some of the issues with streaming data sets. Streaming data sets can be big, they can require low latency as well in training and producing predictions. And what pipe mode allows you to do is speed up the model training time with streaming data sets in particular. So typically what you had to do prior to pipe mode is you'd have to download the training data set onto the SageMaker training instance and then read that from your training instance. And so that would, you'd have to basically download and then read it. Instead, now you can just stream the data directly into your model training compute instance, which drastically speeds up the runtime and the cost of your streaming SageMaker compute instances. There's also script mode, and what script mode allows you to do is it allows you to it gives you the flexibility to define your custom models without having to spend the extra time to write and develop your own inference codes and your own custom containers to be able to deploy these models into production. So a lot of times as data scientists, we're really good at writing these training scripts to train the models and get the best value from these models. But then when it comes to maintaining these models in production, that's something that takes a lot of more time and effort from us. But what we can do with script mode is we can focus on what we're good at and creating our own training scripts, but we can leave the inference part to SageMaker. So we can use all the features that SageMaker already has in its service, like endpoints, batch transform jobs, and inference pipelines with our own custom defined models. Another couple features actually that I also think you guys should know is distributed and incremental training. So distributed training is a feature, these are both features that help reduce the cost and the training runtime for your models. What distributed training does is it can take a single node in your training compute instance and spread out that work into multiple compute nodes. And so what it'll do is it'll split up your training data set and give each compute node a specific shard of your training data set. And so this will speed up your model training runtime and thus reduce the cost when you're of your model training compute instance. And also, there's also incremental training, which is really effective, especially for image classification or object detection in images. And so when you're retraining your model, a lot of times what happens in the background is you're feeding in the original data set plus whatever's changed into your new model, and so every time you retrain it, it becomes incrementally more and more expensive to retrain. What incremental training does is it only feeds in the new and updated data set into your out-of-date model, and only uses that data set to incrementally update your new model. And so for pre-built algorithms in SageMaker, like your image classification and your object detection, this comes as a new feature as a part of it. So I would highly suggest you take advantage of this feature if you're using something like image classification or object detection. And the last feature I wanted to talk about are inference pipelines. And what inference pipelines are they are a linear sequence of data pre-processing steps and algorithm predictions in your inference stage. And so when you're doing inference, a lot of the time the data in production isn't in the format that your model needs it to be able to predict on this data. So it takes a few steps like pre-processing, feature selection and normalization maybe, and then using the model actually, and then any post-processing that you want to do before giving back to your application. So this can take a lot of different steps into account when you're just predicting on your production data. And what Inference Pipeline does is it modularizes each step in your inference stage. And so you can resize all these inference steps on the fly. So if some specific step in your inference stage takes longer than the others, then you can resize that specific step without having to resize the entire pipeline. And it also modularizes your inference pipeline. So what I mean with that as well is it also, you can share individual steps. If you have common steps in multiple inference pipelines, you can share that specific step via Docker container with your other pipelines that you have in production. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed my webinar on SageMaker. If you are interested in SageMaker and want to see a more hands-on demo with your personal data set, we're offering a free demo of SageMaker. And what we'll do is we'll build a customized model with your own data and show you all the features like I did today, plus some other ones that might be more valuable to you specifically, and show you exactly the value that it can bring to your business. If you're interested in this, please contact us at info@dunsolutions.com to discuss more. Thank you.